All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Monday seminar speaker series. We are here both in person and virtually, so I want to welcome our virtual audience. And for those that are signing in virtually, I just remind you, please make sure you're on mute so that our speaker doesn't hear you. And please put any questions you have in the chat thread. And we'll wait till the very end, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end so that we can field those questions. So go ahead and put those in the chat, and I will moderate those at the end. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to our own Dr. Ore Menendez. She's going to introduce our speaker this week. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and thank you everyone for signing in.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, so I have the pleasure to introduce Maria Fernanda, Dr. Maria Fernanda Boza Cuadros. She's a personal colleague. We know each other from back as undergrads in Peru. She's a Peruvian historical and anthropological archaeologist whose work takes a critical and decolonial approaches to disentangle experiences of marginalization in Peru since the European invasion in the 16th century. Dr. Boza Cuadros got her PhD from Syracuse University in 2019 and has 15 years of experience researching Peruvian archaeology and working in different museums in Europe, like the Niedersächsisches Landesmuseum in Hanover, and a postdoctoral research as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Mark Museum in Hamburg, Germany. Her current research, funded by Werner Grant Foundation, focuses on Peruvian so-called forgeries dating to the 19th century and held at European museums, with emphasis on their production, circulation, and the antiques market in their curation in museums across Europe. This project highlights the role of marginalized artists, excavators in the high-brown antiques market, and how the rise of museums, curators, and the authorities' voice further render these artists invisible. Currently, Dr. Boza Cuadros is at the Amsterdam Institute for Humanities Research from the University of Amsterdam. And today, she's going to present us the talk, Forgeries Are Real, non-authentic objects in the Peruvian antiques market. And the abstract goes like this. European, I don't have to read the abstract.
No, I
read the headline if you want
let's
to.
give her some of that time.
So with no further ado, I will introduce you Dr. Boza Cuadros.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Thank you, of course, Dr. Gabriel Ore and Dr. Yamin Bao for the invitation today. Thank you to Lisa Johnson and Matthew Montalto for organizing and setting up this presentation. And thank you everyone who is here. I want to talk today about a group of objects that are held in European museums, mostly ethnographic museums, that in the past have been called fakes, forgeries, replicas, and other words, but I call them neo-antiquities, and I'm going to get into why a bit later. I want to highlight from the get-go a couple of things. First of all, I am only some 7 months into research. I'm going to, of all the museums that hold these, I'm only starting, these are the reflections from work in 8 museums so far. Also, if you happen to hear quotation marks, like in non-authentic in my voice, they are probably there. I use them a lot. So today I want to start talking about the collection practices in Peru in the last quarter of the 19th century and the first quarter of the 20th century. These are the dates where most of the activities of collecting and then selling or donating collections to museums took place, and also considers when these neo-antiquities were likely made. Of course, there are some collections that were donated or sold later, but this is the most of them. Then I get into the neo-antiquities themselves, at least in the Peruvian ones. I talk a bit about the sources because they are both a challenge for the project itself, but also a source of surprise in many cases. From then, I'm going to touch on 4 topics. The first is the provenience of these objects. That is the first problem that we're facing in this. And then 3 concepts that are interrelated and touch on what I had discussed in the abstract about authority, etc. Its expertise, collectibility, and museability. And at the end, some semi-final reflections. Again, what 8 out of 28 museums have shown me so far. So Peru had helped or lured foreigners since the 16th century with these ideas of the gold of the Incas. And independence from Spain in 1821 only fueled more of these in the era of travel and expeditions and the publication of the memoirs. The publications that dealt with Peru, like Squires here, really accelerated this. And in the 1870s, 2 German volcanologists, Wilhelm Reis and Alfons Stubel, spent quite a while in Peru excavating in a cemetery in the north of Lima called Ancon. And their publication was a truly enormous volume with amazing drawings of amazing materials that really encouraged museums and those who had these collector tendencies to come to Peru and create their own collections. So in this context, this era, I call the era of the collector. As an archetype, collector was a man. He came from a privileged social position, and his main activity was not collecting. It was trade or finance, medicine, something that was highly profitable. He was either foreign-born or a criollo, someone of Spanish descent born in Peru. He lived in a city, most likely Lima, and he traveled often around Lima, but also did longer trips to an expedition into the Amazon, for instance. His social circle was composed of other privileged people, of course, and these collections that he gathered were a form of social capital. Those with the more impressive collections had greater fame. Living rooms and sunrooms were spaces to display the taste that these people had in collecting not only antiquities, this is an important part of it, also art, whether the Cusco school painting, colonial of the colonial era, or foreign antiquities, coins from around the world, stuffed animals, the desiccated animals, right? Chinese slippers. The collection itself was what mattered to make it big and impressive. Women were also collectors, and as a matter of fact, Mariana Centeno de Romainville perhaps challenges completely this archetype. She was from Cusco, a landowner. She lived in her hacienda, collected extensively, of course, was visited very often, and other women, very few, also foreign, also happened to collect Peruvian antiquities. And today we're not going to talk about Mariana Centeno. We're going to talk about Emily Ronat, a German governess who amassed a fairly large collection of objects from Peru, Egypt, Jamaica, and Japan that she collected during her life as she traveled working for a series of British people. So collections were very much about social life, and collections were deemed to be complete when they had certain objects in them, right? And they had to have this wide range of them. Collectors exchanged repeats for repeats of others, right? Kind of an album de figuritas, for those of you who collect the Panini albums during the World Cup. And also they commissioned replicas of certain works that they really wanted. The collector was also an indispensable link in the creation of ethnographic museum collections in Europe. At this time, at the end of the 19th century, the European colonial empires were consolidating themselves and their borders in Africa, in Asia, in Oceania. And so the colonial administration could guarantee the collection of objects, right? The arrival of objects, the ease of collection for expeditions or travelers commissioned, tasked with gathering certain types of objects in these areas. Not so in the former Spanish colonies. And so the social network of the collectors in Peru overlapped with networks, academic networks in Europe. And so in a couple of times, there were, for instance, the then curator and benefactor of the Royal Museums in Berlin, Arthur Bessler. If you're familiar with the journals, the Bessler Archiv, the journal of the museums, the Berlin museums, is named after him. He visited Peru. He became good friends with Gretzer, who you saw in the last slide, and a series of others, right? So the collection, for instance, of Jose Mariano Macedo, a very small part of which is shown here, was one of these that were sold via the collector. In this case, very early. He sent his collections to Paris in 1879 before the Chilean army invaded Lima during the War of the Pacific between Peru, Bolivia, and Chile. And he sold most of his collection to Berlin. So this research, what we're going to talk about here, is mostly focused on the museums that have the checks, that are the collections I've already examined, but also I am drawing from online catalogs from the rest of the museums. In total, right now, I've been able to look at about 500 objects that I would call neo-antiquities in 28 museums in 13 countries in Europe. So they are fairly common, and nonetheless, they have not really been studied, and that is part of what I'm trying to redress here. So neo-antiquities are not mere replicas. These are not these desired huaco that someone commissioned specially, right? They formally combine characteristics of Hispanic traditions with motifs that are novel and signal the creativity of the artists that made them, their knowledge of the pre-Hispanic past, and a direct engagement with intellectual trends in Peruvian proto-archaeology of the day. They have been referred to as fakes or forgeries. Occasionally, they have been labeled as colonial or 18th century, but for the most part, when they are described as anything, is fake, forgery, or something like that. Now, I call them neo-antiquities because other terms, first of all, I don't like how fakes and those terms emphasize first the lack of authenticity that is hinging on their ancient origin, and they are also emphasizing this drive to deceive that the artist would have had, right? And in as much of that, what we're seeing really are the anxieties of the museum specialists in the past and the present, rather than the context in which these objects were manufactured, they were collected, and they were circulated, right? I think these were made to be collectibles, to be gathered, to be displayed, and they were also very rich in meaning. And just to be sure, Peru was not the only place where these sort of works were being made. In Mexico, the production of noble works, not quite replicas, started in the 1820s. At the end of the 19th century, there was a very similar market in Bolivia. And during the 19th century, there were entire blocks in Paris that were dedicated or with workshops, right, that were dedicated to creating replicas that not only were sold around Europe, but they were also sent back to the places where the originals were being made. So I think the term neo-antiquity can surely be applied to objects of other geographical origins, but today I'm going to focus only on those produced in Peru. So, so far I've identified, or the ones I call neo-antiquities, are objects made in clay and metal. They borrow forms and they borrow iconographic motifs from material culture from before the Spanish invasion. By the way, I don't use pre-Hispanic or pre-Columbian that much. I tend to use pre-invasion, and I mean the 16th century Spanish invasion. And so, yeah, they combine pre-invasion motifs and forms, also with their own repertoire of motifs and composition. Among the callbacks to pre-invasion material culture, there are ceramic vessels like these portrait vessels, the use of stirrup spouts, anthropomorphic and zoomorphic vessels, anthropomorphic figurines, the metal objects. There are these tupus or shawl needles, right? And also figurines that are standing facing forward with hands holding something in one or both hands, like in this case, or the arms might be bent and holding something above the stomach or the chest. And in some cases, there's even a little like a ball in the cheek that suggests that the individual depicted is chewing coca. So that's not all these objects are, right? They're not just imitating, they have their own characteristics. Among the iconography, what is the most important is the use or the prevalence of anthropomorphized suns, especially, and to a lesser degree moons. So this, for example, moon over here is a fairly complex, these two, the left and the center objects are fairly complex scenes. Most of them are not this complex. But anyway, this moon not only has the sun, is the face of a moon, but the eye is also the head of a man that's sitting cross-legged, that is wearing a pointy hat, has a pointy beard. And to me, this image is very reminiscent of the caricatures of the cartoons that were made of Chinese men in the 19th century in Peru. A lot of them had migrated to work as laborers. And a lot of racist caricatures were published at the time. And that reminds me a lot of that. The sun is no happenstance. At this time, people or the scholars are extensively reading, especially Garcilaso de la Vega, but also other colonial era sources that really emphasize the Inca solar cult. And certainly if one goes through the literature at the time, the idea of the sun being the Inca god is quite important and quite widespread. Now, they're also unique technologically. Objects made in metal are poured in single or double-sided molds, and after being removed, they have been hit repeatedly, or the edges have been cut off. In some cases, there are compounds like figurines stuck to these T-shaped knives of sorts, the scratching of the surface, made to seem old. Also, a lot of all the metal neo-antiquities are quite heavy, and that is also characteristic of the pottery. The bases are very, very thick, right? One holds these vessels and they're not delicate, they're hefty. So yeah, okay. Also, they're made to look old, not only by looking damaged, but the metal is treated chemically. Enrique Brunin in 1895 said in an article, said that one artist whose last name was Vega in Trujillo, northern Peru, had achieved oxidation by burying objects in the dirt mixed with animal urine. Now there are other objects that have a pattern that suggests an oxidizing agent that was more liquid, not only because of the way that it pulls in the crevices of the design, but because it has seeped, like flowed onto the back, down the sides to the back, and then also pulled in a few spots. I think at this point, this difference probably corresponds to different techniques used by different workshops. But again, that is just a preliminary thought for now. In the case of pottery, the surfaces were also damaged, sometimes scratching them, adhering some dirt. Also, the pottery is very different in that it was not painted, it was not slipped, it was fired to a lower temperature. It seems to have been fired also in an environment with a lot of smoke. There's a lot of smoke staining, right? And then sometimes they adhered actual archaeological textiles to them to give it some extra, flair of authenticity. Now, getting to sources, a lot of the first problem with a lot of these objects and collection studies in general, in museums, obviously, but especially in Germany, is that a lot of the times the objects are no longer there, right? There, most museums, or a lot of museums, especially in the big cities, whereas where these ethnographic museums tend to be, had a lot of damage during the bombings of World War II. And so a lot of collections were lost. In the case, for instance, in Hamburg, in the now Mark, before the Museum for Ethnology, this on the right is a photo from the 1890s, the first half of the 1890s. And so the board at top with the metal objects, there's only 9 out of 16 that are still present. And of the pottery, there's only still present in the bottom row, the third from the left. But objects themselves can carry a lot of information. And these objects are going, especially the ones from the period that I'm interested in, tend to have enough to go for in case of, for instance, missing documentation. That can also happen. I'm going to get to, oh yeah. In other cases, for instance, the big ethnographic museum in Paris is the Musée de Quai Branly, and the collections in the Quai Branly used to be in the Louvre, used to be in the Museum of Man, in Trocadero, and they've been in a journey from one museum to the next. So the collection and their documentation have also been separated. This stone axe is not a neo-antiquity, but it's a good example of how much can be said, right? This is from the Macedo collection, and although it was sold as part of the Macedo collection, there are other Peruvian collections that have objects with that sticker, because Macedo and that collector, say Wilhelm Gretzer, had exchanged or sold certain objects, right? We know it comes from Peru, comes to Puno. If we were to look at the catalog of the Macedo collection and looking at 1358, there would be some description about this stone axe. And then in the back, VA 5025 is the inventory number for the Berlin Museum. Museums tend to have photographic records that are going to be helpful for a series of reasons, right? On the right is an example of what is called in German an Iconokatalog. And this is a visual reference guide that museum curators created. And we get the source, in this case, the Museum for Ethnology in Hamburg, in the top right. The description says pottery from graves, forgeries, things of gold, and then for origin, Herkunft, Peru, South America, right? And then the Macedo collection photo on the left is showing not just, it's not helpful just in the sense of inventory, of knowing what used to be there, but also how things were presented together. At this time, there was a lot of emphasis on aesthetics, and creating these visiting cards was also part of the advertising, to call it something, of these collections. So we got to see how these collectors themselves were thinking of their own collections. Inventory cards, perhaps my favorite. Depending on the museum, they're going to vary on what they have, but in general, what was done was when these collections arrived, each object got an inventory card. The inventory number is up here, B2957. Up here in the top right is that it was a gift from C. Loffat. It came from Trujillo. It was admitted into the museum on the 6th of November of 1895, right? It was described as an idol. And in 1895, they used the term falsificat in the description. Trujillo, Peru again, sometime when the newer pen technology came out, somebody went through, checked again, called it a Fälschung, also another word in German for forgery. And then this in red up here is from an inventory that was made in the 1950s. And then in the back, there's a drawing of the object. These drawings and cards are really important because, again, in some cases, the object might not have any description whatsoever, right? There may not be a sticker that says Colección Macedo, which was what happened when I first started this project that was part of an exhibition. Most of the objects had no inventory numbers. They had worn off, and because they had been deemed forgeries, nobody took a second glance. So I went through some 14, 15 boxes like this one on the left from the Peruvian section. This one is specifically for forgeries and suspicious things made out of clay. There are internal communications, when it comes to documents, internal communications. This is a blacklist of ethnographic dealers. There's correspondence with other museums, and with a little bit of luck, some records of previous exhibitions. And then also, of course, publications proper. This is the article I referenced by Bruning earlier, and I'm a fan of these memoirs of the International Congress of Americanists, because the first 7 or 8 iterations, these publications don't only contain the papers that were presented, but there are also transcriptions of the conversations that happen afterwards. And so there's a lot of insight and nuance that is added with these conversations. Okay, so back to the 500 objects in the 28 museums. They come mostly from coastal Peru. Most of them are going to come from, or are recorded as coming from Trujillo, Chicama, the Chimbote, Santa area, Ancon, Pachacamac, and Chincha, but there are, of course, others from other places. For the most part, however, they will say things like Peru, North Coast, right? According to the article by Bruning that I just showed you, and a couple others, workshops for fakes existed near the port of Callao, the port of Lima, the vicinity of Trujillo, Santa, Chancay, and possibly Chicama. Now, although there is a lot, it's very possible that sometimes the provenience stated in the objects or the documents is not correct. In some cases, it's not the collector who donated or sold the collection, but one of his or her descendants, right? They're like, I don't know, my grandfather used to live in Arequipa. And well, yeah, but the grandfather once took a trip to Lima, and on the way back in Callao, they bought this, right? But in any case, it is very consistent. There's only one or two that say Choquequirao, right? I think for Juliaca it's only one. By and large, they come from the coast, and these locations coincide rather well with the loci of international maritime trade along Peru, right? Especially Callao and Chincha, but also the location of European agricultural investments. The Gildemeister family, for instance, had huge amounts of lands in the north coast, but there were also others in the central and south coast. The production was probably quite significant, the number that were being made. Wilhelm Reis of Ancon fame, he said that their products are shipped by full boatloads. So, and again, I've located 500, and this is without looking at every single possible place yet. All right, that is quite a significant amount, and most of them were collected in the 1890s, and I think they were probably made not too much earlier. Although by the early 1880s, they are already being produced. Now, most of the artists involved in the production of neo-antiquities were of indigenous descent, mostly peasants, perhaps some fishermen, with the exception of one Italian immigrant who was living in Callao. And most of indigenous and mestizo artists lived on or nearby archaeological sites. Given their expertise in the handling of both the archaeological pre-invasion iconography and forms, but also the use of the sun iconography, for instance, they had pretty good grasp of both the archaeology and the academic discourses at the time, right? So, as I said, the sun motif was was no coincidence. This is a direct reading of Garcilaso and others. And my question from there is, well, how does a peasant who's likely unable to read and write come to know so well both the material record of the more academic ideas about pre-invasion Peru and these conventions from pre-invasion Peru? And for now, I think is First, because the artists and the excavators that foreigners were hiring, the looters, were, if not the same people, very close together, right, very close to each other. But also, I think there was a degree of cordiality and exchange of communication that is not to be dismissed. The excavators, if you see some photos, or quite a few photos of these expeditions that Europeans did to Ancon or Chincha or wherever, right? At the end of the day, it looks like an archaeological project. A whole bunch of people sitting around bottles of beer, some of them Pilsen Callao. So it seems there was quite a bit of information exchange from the writing, of course, writing of Europeans, so take it with a grain of salt. At least the more serious collectors, there were people that they had hired permanently, basically, to loot for them, right? To excavate for them. They would bring them things to their house. So I think a lot of these ideas are flowing in a way that is still vertical, but not as vertical as sometimes it is assumed when collection studies are conducted, right? So, and again, the workshops are probably right next to the Waka, right? And where the excavators and the artists are living. So these were experts. The artists, the excavators were experts. And with that, I want to sage into expertise. In 1990, the British Museum exhibited some of their many forgeries in an exhibition called Fake, The Art of Deception. And the head curator started in the catalog and other publications with this maxim: fakes can teach us many things, most obviously perhaps the fallibility of experts. Now, I think at the end of the day, expertise is probably at the end of a long list of questions about the study of non-authentic objects, right? Even if that's a question at all. I mentioned before an anxiety of European curators. Take the Macedo collection, for instance. Macedo conducted his own excavations, right? He was there when people were digging for him, and he also had neo-antiquities. I have not been able to find these two exactly, but there are similar objects both in Berlin and in this case in Hanover. And he exhibited them along his authentic objects. He also collected a broad range of other holdings. And so I don't think that what made these objects worthy of being collected that was so concerning to curators, right? Their old origin was something that concerned Macedo. He wanted these things and he exhibited them because they had an intrinsic value, or a value that in his calculation of desires made them desirable. So expertise construed the way that we tend to think about it is certainly secondary in the gathering of these collections. I like to think of collectibility, these characteristics that make an object desirable as a collectible, right? And again, another man with a huge collection, Fritz Buch, he lived many years in Bolivia, collected there, traveled around Peru quite a lot, collected in Peru too, sold his collection to the Grassi Museum in Leipzig. And with a collection, he submitted a notebook. He called these objects, right, that were later labeled as forgeries, as Nachbildung, which translates to replica. So think again about Wilhelm Reis and how he's describing the boatloads of these objects. So I think these objects are being collected because they are ethnographic objects, right? Museums wanted ethnographic objects. They wanted African dance masks and other things that were being used. Some expeditions walked by and literally took houses that people were still living in and everything that was in them, right? And that's why these are being collected. But museums were so concerned with antiquities, the ancient ones, that they were kind of missing the point. That did not, okay, I'm gonna go a little fast now. So on the end of curators, they were very concerned with the integrity of their collections, right? It was very different what was considered collectible or that possessed collectability. Ernest Theodor Ami, the curator director of the museum at Trocadero in Paris, when this collection of American antiquities was published in Madrid because it had just been acquired by the National Archaeological Museum, published a response to warn our Spanish colleagues against the forgeries more and more numerous that their correspondents of Peru sent to them. The integrity of the museum, right? The intent of deceit over there and the lack of expertise of these correspondents are listed in there. And a similar thing is what Carl Luders here in Hamburg also insisted this time in 1890, a few years later. He and others at this International Congress of Americanists, this is what I was talking about, the discussions, we're talking about having a catalog of all the fake things that are being made so that collectors are warned and know not to get them. They never produced a catalog. That would have been really interesting. And again, going back to Rice this time, Rice was the only one of the three that was in Peru. And according to him, the classifications cannot be considered as such because the objects are made for the daily use of the inhabitants. There was an entire conversation about that. He was dismissed, but I think he was likely onto something, right? And they are also missing the perspective of the collector themselves. Down the line in the provenance chain, there's the connected term that I'm thinking about is the museability of these objects. And in the 1800s, they're still being exhibited with the purpose of warning others, right? Ami did it, Luders did it, and that seemed to be the pattern for a while. I don't know of very many others. But by 1927, again in Hamburg, they put together a large exhibition of forgeries that separated them in products made by the natives exclusively for sale to whites, so-called the globetrotter goods, and European export goods that imitate products of natives. And they also went into how the microscope and chemistry can be used to distinguish fakes from others. These objects made for a tourist market sounds familiar to all of us, right? Souvenirs are huge. And what's interesting about this article is that the author ends talking, wondering whether pieces that are made from the same clay as the originals can actually be considered fake. Provenance, in the 1930s, Emily Ronat donated her collection near the end of her life. She was like 82 years old, to the Institute of Ethnology at the University of Göttingen, including these bronze artifacts, right? They were admitted knowing that they were not archaeological, being considered fake, and they were admitted because they were going to be used for training future ethnologists. They were exhibited too, more as a celebration of a new collection, which, considering this was a Peruvian collection of fakes, was a risky move in 1939. But anyway, I think what I like about this collection and find so interesting is she insists she excavated them herself, which makes me think that sometimes these objects were being planted. It's another reason to consider the excavators experts. They were creating an entire scenario where they are giving these objects authenticity or layers of authenticity in their iconography, right? In the condition of the surface with the patina, and also the right provenience. So by the mid-20th century, the production of fakes seems to have been more focused on authentic looking replicas, right? Which continued throughout the century in a booming market for souvenirs. I'm under the impression that they were more scarcely exhibited and published, in part because a lot of scholars insisted that they not be published, so that more accomplished replicas or more accomplished forgeries would not be harder to spot. So in dealing with them like this, these forgeries were transformed into more dangerous objects. They were commented among peers. They were regarded as curiosities. Curators may have even been reluctant to admit to having them, right? A former colleague said to me that this was the head of research. And she said that admitting to having forgeries would be disrespectful to past colleagues and their expertise in identifying these objects. And also conversations with other curators, they'll say, oh yeah, you go visit a museum and the curator there will be like, oh, look at this. But other than that, they're not as serious objects as the ones that do get exhibited, right? So they've been relegated to the back of storage rooms, but the antiquities are not mere replicas. They combine the characteristics, some characteristics of pre-invasion traditions with novel motifs that are signaling the creativity of the artists, their knowledge of the pre-Hispanic past, and a direct engagement of these artists with intellectual trends in Peruvian proto-archaeology of their day. So this oversight is really obscuring what neo-antiquities can say about collecting at the end of the 19th century, the overall ideas on value and aesthetic that ran through the formation of the large Peruvian collections, how authenticity was determined, what was considered worthy of being exhibited, right? Some collectors, like Ronat, were convinced of their pre-invasion origins, but not all of them. Marcelo and others were comfortable exhibiting them among their authentic pieces. They signaled that even though these objects were not considered ancient, they still had value and aesthetic qualities that afforded them a space in their collections that they were gathering. The attitudes of these curators through the mid-20th century was also one of greater acceptance of neo-antiquities, if not by this name. And they set quite a bit of importance in holding such objects in their collections. So the antiquities are very much objects of their time, and certainly more complex than artifacts of deceit, right? It's these two opposing aspects of them that have been lost in how we really think about them if we do it for very long. And most importantly, I think the antiquities demonstrate that Peruvian peasants were active in the antiquities trade in the late 19th century beyond simply shoveling for rich white people. They were artists who were producing coveted pieces, who had good knowledge of archaeological artifacts, of ethnohistoric sources. And so in highlighting the role as artists, we're lending more complex understanding to the formation of these trajectories, of these collections, their trajectories beyond the ideals of the Europeans that gathered them. And I think now is a good time for questions. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you again for this wonderful talk. So I'm going to give you an in-person clap because I can't figure out how to do the emojis. But this is just a wonderful talk. Before I open it to, I know that we have some questions in the room, but before I get there, is there any questions out there in the virtual audience after the talk here? You can go ahead and put those in the chat, or you can turn your mic on and speak directly if you'd like, if you prefer. Okay, well, I'll get us started then if somebody might be actively typing or something. I think this is a wonderful talk, and I really appreciate that you are reconsidering this notion of authenticity. And you say that it carries this assumption of this drive to deceive. And rather than considering them in that light, looking at them not just as imitations, but as reflecting a knowledge of the past while also adding their own contributions, I can really appreciate that. What I think is interesting and what I'm curious about is in those cases that you described where there is this intentional aging of them, these kind of chemical processes they use, the scratching up the surface, even the fixing of textiles and archaeological dirt to them. So if we were to try to reconsider these objects not as these, as you call them, artifacts of deceit, what else do you see this doing? How do we change that idea, and how are they doing something different by doing those things to them?
Well, I think that to a degree it's definitely not black or white, right? They're not solely artifacts of deceit. They are production in their own sense. Now, clearly, some of them have the appeal of coming out of the ground. And if they're going to come out of the ground, they have to come out looking like the other things that come out of the ground, right? And exactly the dynamics there is certainly something that is benefiting excavators, right? And I think from what I know, for instance, from the Ronas Collection, that is quite outstanding in how detailed the documentation is. Most of these collections have very little documentation. This is the appeal of having, you know, a day out. Instead of going hiking, you go looting and you take things home, right? You want the things, you want your client, the person you excavate for, to be happy. There is going to be an assumption of authenticity because of where they're coming from, right? So you don't want to, I think this patina that is being given to these objects is being, is giving it in that sense. In some cases, I'm not sure whether these objects were treated, say in the 1890s, and then they were restored later on in museums or not. The only museum where I found records of treatment of objects has been in Dresden. That was done in the 1960s. And yet there are quite a few of these objects that don't seem to have any sort of patination. Exactly why that is, I'm not entirely sure. But there's also then the possibility that they were being sold new, right? Freshly made, unpatinated, probably not coming out of the ground as if they had been buried 500 years ago, along with the mummy bundle that they accompany.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, Kat, you do not have a question more? Okay, so I'll moderate this. So Jennifer asked, when you mention the use of chemistry and microscopes to determine authenticity, what characteristics do they look for? And then after that, Dr. Jorge Menendez has a question too.
Okay, so exactly what they mean by chemistry in 1927, I'm not sure. This is a few years, some 15, 20 years after they started using X-rays to study mummy bundles. So there was a lot of, well, what else can we do with these things in the museums, right? For the microscopes, they're probably looking at the paste of the objects, and also in this, let me get to this. These masks over here are masks from Tirol, and they were made with different types of wood that the older one from the original from the fake. So it may have been the paste in the of the clay objects of the pottery, things like the wood and other organic materials. But again, this is the most detailed part of what is left from this exhibition. Unfortunately, we don't have much more. We don't have. Ideally, we would have the text, the list of objects, how the room was laid out, but we don't have that.
I unmuted you.
Thank you for the talk. I keep thinking that when we all went through our volunteer moments at different museums, working on these catalogs, we all have this idea of these forgeries, or these were like just fake, and they were like the ugly ducklings of these collections. We learned to identify them just because they're a different quality in them, not only like iconography or anything. They just make different. But what's your perception from Peruvian archaeologists and Peruvian curators about these type of objects? Because again, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we will put them just in a box and it's like, oh, they're fake. And they will not get like a Ministry of Culture register number or even a museum register number. Just one lesser important number, like the inventory number. They don't even deserve I remember clearly, they don't even deserve a form description. So what our colleagues think about this type of objects now that we have laying around in different museums across Europe, but maybe not so much in Peru?
I don't know if they're in Peru or not. In part, it's a problem of cataloging and how things are inventoried, right? You said it yourself. If they're fakes, you put them in a box and then you don't see them again. Maybe you show them to a colleague you're friendly with and you start laughing about it. It's only the first time I saw the first objects I saw at the Mark, right? My first week there, were some of these metal objects that are on the photo on the left. And my first reaction was to laugh, because I was like, I don't need to know. We were in the storage, in one of the storage rooms, right? Just going through things like my first week there, the curator is showing me around. And I didn't need to ask where they were from to know they had to come from Peru. And that was exactly what they were. I mean, beyond that, I think curators realize that in some cases, some things are probably miscatalogued. In Berlin, there are a lot of these small metal objects that, granted, I'm not very familiar with. They're called lauraques. They're more common in, I guess, in certain Bolivian contexts. And they may have been, and they are labeled as being from Peru, right? And they're in the suspicious drawer. Maybe they were labeled as Peru, but they were from Bolivia, right? Or maybe there's something, a problem that I have, and I should say for the rest, my temporal specialization is the 19th century. We don't really know what life was like in material terms in the 19th century, right? We don't know how peasants lived along the Peruvian coast in 1890 or in 1830. And granted, my work in the field is mostly about ports, so I can only talk about that. So were some of these things being used like that? One of the figurines, I think I have it. There's a figurine in the Museo de América in Madrid that looks a lot like one of these smaller ones here on the right. That's made out of silver and is hanging from a barayok, a staff of command, right? That is supposed to be dated to the 19th century. Is it possible that that's what these are imitating, right? These are actually ethnographic objects that are being used in another context, and that's how they're being collected. I think overall curators are very eager to try to see how far this goes, right? They're pretty interested. It's not another study of, you know, pottery from here or textiles from there. Also, in my experience now with the idea of repositioning museums, decolonizing collections, and also museum practices, they tend to be very open with access to objects, to documentation. So that's quite encouraging. And I mean, museum curators have stories from, you know, older colleagues who already retired and have stories about it. So the conversation clearly never stopped. It's just that it didn't go beyond a conversation to get into exhibitions and publications.
Yeah, so we are at 12:30. If there are those of you that really need to sign off, I completely understand. If we have another second, there is one last minute question that Kat had. She wanted to know whether museums if these collections are donated or they're sold. Do museums pay money for these collections and then find out later that they are forgeries, quote unquote forgeries?
In some cases, they paid money. In some cases, they ran their GoFundMe campaign to get the money. In some cases, they were donated, not necessarily by the collector, but after the collector's death by his wife or the descendants. These things did not come alone. These were part of collections with authentic objects in them too, right? Archaeological artifacts that may have made the most of the collection. The exception, sort of, is the Ronas Collection. In her case, most of the Peruvian collection is these neo-antiquities, like the ones I showed, but there are also objects from Japan, objects from Jamaica, from around Europe, and the Institute of Egyptology also received a lot of objects from her. and that was a gift. So again, these were not coming in only the forgeries, right? The Ronas Collection, they discussed many times, well, should we get it? Are they real? Are they not? There are so many doubts. And actually, Emily Ronat had a large collection of pottery. She originally offered her collection to the Prussia Museum in Königsberg, that is now Kaliningrad, I think. It's in part of in the region that used to be Germany and is now Poland. And the director accepted the pottery and refused to take the bronzes because they were fakes, right? And then Göttingen took them happily to train folks.
Okay, I think this just speaks to how interesting your talk was, because I still have questions coming in. So we are kind of out of time, but if you would like to give a moment to answer this one. Otherwise, I do also encourage you, I'm sure, if he's willing, you can maybe contact her, or certainly look out for this study to be published, I'm sure. So Jennifer wants to know, can you comment on the importance of non-importance of communicating with indigenous Peruvian natives concerning the meanings of artifacts in reference to generational knowledge / oral histories? That's kind of, I'm sure that's a lengthy response you're going to have to give. So I don't know if you can answer that in an abbreviated
way. For now, I mean, this is something that I have considered for later on. The question is, who are we going to ask what? There are some people that are producing replicas that, from conversation, I know that this is a generational thing, right? I know someone in Cajamarca that has been doing it for decades and has, the workshop is all on that. So it requires its own tracing back on this. As for the use of objects, that again that's a fantastic question. I know of someone, a French researcher, blanking on her name right now, who was looking at some of the production of things, but not really the use of things. So yeah, no, I mean, the Peruvian side, the Peru side of the research is something that I had thought for later on, as well as looking at collections in the US. I've seen some of these in some collections in the US. But for now, 13 countries are plenty.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you reorient the question to take things more seriously, whether they're authentic or inauthentic, a crafter is a crafter if it's 1100 or 1800s, right? So maybe this is indicative of a new direction in which we can look at, collections that doesn't dismiss the skill that it takes. Obviously, there's a skill. And as you mentioned, it looked like Chinese immigrants, so it also reflects its time, right? So I'm excited about what you're doing. I think you're presenting a whole new direction in looking at museum collections that I think is wonderful. So thank you again for sharing this with us, and I'll look forward to what you come out with.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
And for everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and we'll see you next week.
Adios.